Hello, everyone. And Castle is not in the center, so he needs to refocus. Um, but yeah, welcome everybody to another book club. He's moving his chair. That also works. um, yeah. So Castle's gonna be the guest of the day because he loves this chapter. So I'm gonna invite him to lead in the upcoming chapter. I I kind of got uh, distracted in reading Deuteronomy while I was engaging in rereading the chapter, and that is a long piece of text with a lot of symbolism and a bunch of things appeared to me, right? So first thing that appeared to me is that it's layered, right? So you have a foundation of symbolism, and then within that basis, within that basic knowledge, there's extensions on that basic symbolism. And um, I had a couple of realizations, and those are my experiences from this week, I guess. One of the realizations is that if you don't have meaning in your life or whatever, or you have insufficient meaning, you can't see the meaning, or you can't even imagine that people do something from meaning, right? So when reading the Bible, like I was, right, like you like the idea of the meaning behind what's written, right, and that it's purposeful is so alien to you that it's inaccessible uh, to even contemplate, right? Not that it's in a not that you don't understand, it's literally inaccessible, right? And so like I was at a certain point I was experiencing some of it myself, right? So like I know there's something there, right? Like this is not someone just randomly writing sentences that are curses or blessings or whatever just because like he writes them down. No, he's pointing at something, right? And like I can see the pattern, right? But I can't see the meaning behind the pattern, which is a really awkward situation. It's like, wait, what? Like, why can't I see what this means? Like, this is so odd. Um, so yeah, that was kind of my experience, and this is the way that I'm coming into it this week because I'm gonna pay attention to how everybody's relating to the meaning, um, and how they're being receptive, right? Because like I think part of or maybe all of the meaning is like a relational quality, right? And so in order to get to the meaning, we kind of have to imitate that relation so that we can see or feel similar things, right? So that things appear to us. So that's where my intention is pointed at this week. Gustav, you wanna go next?
Sure. So I think quite succinctly this week, right now I have a a problem on my mind which has to do with communicating certain concepts to other people. And um it has to do with all the symbolism stuff, and it's a question of how do I communicate, or even should I communicate certain things, and um like how should I be, like how should I integrate patterns into being. And it definitely has to do with I think seeing more implications for the I think it's called, instead of like a material, but a functional ontology, or something like a functional model of the world. So I think I'm searching for answers, or I'm gathering material for that problem. So that's why I'm here today. I hope I find something useful. Yeah. Mark, would you like to go next?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, as normal, I think say those of us who see patterns and meaning in the world um, are trying to shepherd people who have a loss of the poetic way of informing the world, and so they can't necessarily see the meaning. Like patterns in and of themselves aren't interesting. I know Jonathan Pageau just did a video this morning that he released where he was talking about a misunderstanding between the name and the context and that name is used in terms of the reference for that name, and that's part of symbol. Like a symbolism, a symbol by itself doesn't mean anything. Like it can't. Meaning happens from content plus context, and context changes meaning uh, in almost all cases, right? So changing context changes meaning. And so, again, as somebody who's already seeing all this and to some extent, understands what people are missing, I'm still here to help guide and point out things that people may have missed in this, because it is, if you're not used to thinking that way, if you're used to thinking, 2 + 2 = 4, and therefore what the symbol 2 means, then you're not going to get this, because this isn't that type of relationship. So yeah, just here to point out some of those things and give some examples, because it's been a hell of a week, as I talked about on my live stream last night, and a lot of stuff is changing very quickly, and a lot of the things that we see that are, we'll say, normal patterns are being read as symbols, when symbolism is wrapped up in these patterns, but they're not the same thing. Christopher.
Yeah, my intention here is to keep incrementally improving in understanding the symbols and the poetic information. So
I guess I'll go ahead and go last.
No, hold on. Christopher, did you have any life experience that related to the exploration in the book?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm slowly getting to where I can integrate the concepts a little bit, and it's been helpful in having a few conversations over the past week. So, I mean, I don't know how far to go into that, but
well, it's always nice, right, when you share something that's like confirming something, right, or maybe some place where you get lost, right, because that helps aim everybody in relation to you.
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was just having a few conversations that, especially at church in the midweek Bible study, we were going over stuff, and I was able to notice how things related a bit more, and was able to share some of that. So
Great. Now you can go, Castle, and you can keep going as well.
Oh, goodness. Sorry. Well, we'll see. I've only been sitting down here for a few minutes. I just got home from the store. It has been crazy. As Mark said, just absolutely insane week. That is probably going to, and of course, it's been very interesting to see how everything has been playing out, at least for me, but I think a lot of the stories from you guys have reflected the same, that the readings that we have for these book clubs are often very topical for just how the week went, which is very interesting. And there's a saying that a friend of mine had said, he's like, not surprised, just amazed. It's just like, yep, like I am literally in the maze, like actually navigating this, but also, yes, of course it would be like this. So my sort of title here, last week I had, even though it's kind of cut off by the circle there, but in this chapter we'll get to a point where it's part of the curse, where it's, you'll have no rest for the sole of your foot, and that when in the morning you'll wish it was evening, and then in the evening you'll wish it was morning, all this stuff. So last week I wish it was evening. This time I wish it was morning, both of which were accurate at the time. And also this sort of thing of, we'll get into a little bit of the serving known principles, but also that there's a certain level of space that can be maintained through kind of revivification and healing and giving your time and attention to things. And also, like, there are limits to that. Like, it's not always necessarily symmetrical. And sometimes, like, you still get flooded either way. Like, there's, like, cooperation is also very important. And I saw that in a very high contrast way this week, where I saw that at work, there was the big storm that happened in this past week, and that took out a big chunk of my coworkers, including someone that I rely on very heavily. And the workload became actually the largest I've seen in the entire 3 years I've been there, and I had to deal with that by myself. And so that was an interesting thing to kind of see, like, my body shrank, and then my ability to kind of maintain space was still happening, but the cost was enormous. And then I got invited, like, this was another one of those sort of black swan moments where after the entire week had kind of gone through, and it was honestly horrific start to finish. Like Monday through Friday, just all the way through. There were some nice little reprieves and everything, but very few. And I was called out of nowhere to assist with something that normally would involve, like, you would have to be like an altar server or a deacon to do this, essentially. But they were so, like, short staffed that I was essentially deputized to assist somebody with some things that were essentially an honor, like, way above my station as layman, like, just, and not something that where my existence in there was profaning the thing I was doing, but it was an opportunity to, like, provide support. And it was interesting because I was hesitant to accept, because I was like, they offered me the opportunity, and I didn't even know all the words that they said. I was like, which is, like, I'm pretty deep into words, and I didn't know all the words they said. I was like, are you sure that this is the thing that I should do? And they said, no, like, you're going to do fine. Like, we know you're going to do fine because we're telling you that you're going to do it fine. And it all worked out perfectly well. But I found it interesting that right after that, my complete loss of energy that lasted for 5 days was actually reversed by service. So it was like I was so tired from work, and then an opportunity to serve within a larger structure with direct authority over me, like providing direct support to an authority for about an hour or something like that, actually gave me complete energy. And, like, I'm able, like, I'm still kind of suffering some of the consequences of the week, but for the most part, it was like I was able to bounce back. So I think that's an interesting thing, and we're going to see a lot of this kind of the positive being stated negatively and vice versa. I think that's going to come up a bit here. A nuke was dropped on me last week that I've just been itching to drop on everyone else, so we'll get there in due time. But that's my intro.
So we want to mention RJ a little bit. So he's on the side seed, returning next week, I assume. Yeah. Let's see. Castle. Where did I get?
47.
Oh, and that was pretty close because I'm not prepared. So there. Take it away, Castle.
Okay. So this is something that I was thinking on a little bit. We've been kind of stumbling over the stone for the last 50 chapters almost, the thing of the positive and negative. And, like, I was thinking about this a little bit, looking at the etymology of positive. So positive, also looking at, like, position, or to pose, to kind of have something standing or placed. And so you have the axle or the pillar that is placed, and then what I was looking is negative is just the knee is just not. So it's just like there's the one that's placed, and then it's just the one that just is not. And so it's very easy to kind of have, like, the moral connotation, but there's also this sort of thing of just like, if it's turning, then it's either placed or it isn't. Like if you had like a glass or like a chess piece or something like that, it's just like, okay, it's either placed or it's not. There's there's only one correct position generally for, like, a chess piece or something like that, or in that case it would be like a little pillar on the table. And so if that piece gets overturned for whatever reason, you know, a wrong move or something like that, then it's simply not in a positive state. Um, so I was looking at, so we have the two mountains of the blessing and the curse. So he says here, behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. Blessing if you heed the commandments of the Lord our your God, and the curse if you heed them not and turn after other gods which you do not know. So I was looking at blessing and curse. So curse is connected to course. So that, and also curve. So I mean, there's a lot of this kind of wrong and ring symbolism that we've been seeing a lot. And then the blessing is connected to the word blood, but also to blow or to swell. And that is connected also to the bull, ball, like balloon, like that type of thing. And a lot of those words are also connected to things like Leviathan and all of these other things that usually mean something like that's kind of swollen or round. And so that has been kind of portrayed in the not positive frame for quite a while. That you have the golden calf, that type of thing. That means kind of go around, or you know, bull itself is like a swollen animal. And but of course, in the Holy Temple, you also had images of fully grown, domesticated bulls that were engraved there, not a calf, which is a completely different word. And so looking at that and seeing, oh, that within this context, that's etymologically connected to blessing and is itself a positive. I don't know if anyone has anything on this page.
Well, I have a bunch of responses to what you said. I don't know if they're necessarily related to this space, right? But when we're talking about the firmament and the space that's created, right, under heaven,
Mhm.
that is blowing something up,
Yeah.
right? And so and then you also have God blowing the spirit into Adam, right? And so like he's also creating the potential for life in him with the life-giving spirit, right? So and I think Matthieu Pageau even talked about this, right, with the sourdough, right, and the leavened and the unleavened bread. So like the leavening is also the blowing up. Um, so yeah, I can see how that is related to the potential for opportunity to arise, uh, and I wanna contrast blowing with speaking, because blowing is like speaking without words. Like it's an unformed spirit, while words are like a formed spirit. Um, yeah, I guess that was my direct response to you. Oh yeah, like the blood, uh, like I think the blood and rivers and like there's an establishment within that which is blown, right? Like you could, well, here we go back to the meaning thing, right? So like you establish something, and then within the establishment, uh, upon the presuppositions, you get this second layer, which might be actually life, but I don't have to get into that right now. Um, so a couple things on this page that I got. So it's talking about a commandment, um, and like I see the commandment as a constraint, right? Or it's like the marking a land, right? The borders of a land that you will stay within, and that binds you to the land. Uh, and then if you get out of that, so there's a there's an adherence to the constraint, right? or in other words, if you settle on the land, like the land can provide certain things to you if you work it, right? But only if you work it, you're allowed to get fruit from the land, because like that fruit is not going to be available without working it, and if you leave the land, like the land is not going to provide you fruit, right? And so like I think that is a really good frame to read Deuteronomy that we'll get into next chapter, right? Because like that's basically uh, the contrast of the blessing and the curse, right? Like if we're within a constraint, now certain things become available to us, and if we don't adhere to the constraint, um, we get into this other perspective, and I've been thinking about it, right? So it's like in Deuteronomy they go over, well, what does it mean to be following God, to be blessed, right? Like it means that you follow these laws, or you stay within this area, right? And then if you go out of the area, what does that mean? What does that look like, right? And then it's repeating somewhat of an inversion, but not completely, because he's not repeating the same lines in the contradiction, and so I think that's maybe something to keep in the back of our minds when we go through the rest of this chapter.
Yeah, I wanted to point out a few things here that I think people won't necessarily catch on first viewing, especially with the diagram, right? So if you look carefully, the negative and the positive are still serving principles, right? In other words, the principles aren't optional. They don't go away, right? The opposite of principled behavior is not unprincipled behavior. That's not true, right? The negative aspect of principled, of positive principles is unknown principles, right? So you're always serving principles, right? Those are a statement of a type of pattern is a principle, the statement of a type of a pattern. So you're always serving principles. The question is, do you know what principles you're serving? Because that at least has the potential to be positive. Or are you serving unknown principles, in which case it's automatically negative, right? And that's the difference between positive and negative in this context. I think it's really important, right? And it's not that you don't need aspects of negative and positive to form a world. Of course you do, right? But it is that if you're, say, too much on the negative side, too far into the unknown, that's a problem, right? Whereas if you're serving the known principles, then at least you know what you're doing, right? But it can't be the only thing you do. So again, it's not like all encompassing. But a lot of people get confused by this. I think that they and to be unprincipled, it doesn't mean you don't have principles, you aren't following principles. It means you're serving unknown principles. And that's the better way to think about it. That is the negative aspect of principles, is your knowledge of your engagement in them, not your engagement in them, because that isn't optional. And that is, people are horrifically confused about this, right? Like I have been my whole life. I've seen it everywhere. So I'm glad that this is in this diagram here, because it's laid out rather clearly. And I think the only room for real confusion is an objection against the emanation, right? Pay attention to the direction of the arrows. But that, I would call that an invalid objection. And it's important to understand the difference between heeding the commandments and not heeding them, right? Which, I think is outlined nicely here. And even though it's, we'll say, heavily symbolic, one of the things about this particular diagram is this diagram is very deep. There's a lot here. You do well to sort of contemplate this and reflect upon it for quite a long time, compared to some of the other diagrams that have come before.
I think one of my reflections on this diagram is that comparing the curse to like the axle in other diagrams, the principles here are not just unknown, but at some point they're like unknowable if you're like too far into the being flung about by time end of things.
Yeah, I think that's fair, right? The flood makes things unknowable because you can no
Yeah.
longer see them, and the flood's going to come up later on in our readings here. So yeah, that's a good point. It's yeah, unknown doesn't mean you're ignorant necessarily. It could mean that you're blinded by a flood, for example, or blinded by any number of other things, and that's actually really important too. So I'm glad you shared that. Thanks.
I think this might resolve it a little bit, right? Like the further you're away from something established, the more likely you are to bounce between principles as well, right? So you lose consistency, and so then you can't get discernment about the principle you're serving because you're not serving a principle, like you're serving multiple. So
That kind of reminds me of like the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, where he's off in like this foreign land where there's people who you can like chop their heads off and they're still okay. You know, and he's supposed to like maintain his principles in this foreign place, and then he gets into the situation that's a lot like Joseph in Egypt with the woman that was trying to commit adultery, and he doesn't know how to actually properly handle it. And it turns out like the solution at the end was actually he should have just maintained his principles, but he was trying to like figure out how to use the foreign principles to his advantage, and then like he just comes away from it like hailed as a hero for surviving, but then feeling like a failure himself for not actually just sticking to what he knew, but instead trying to like reinvent the wheel, so to speak. I like the image as well of the of kind of like the expanse under the firmament, but also the kind of blowing the air into Adam, and very comical image of Adam as like balloon animal. That I wish Sally Joe or somebody would probably draw like an inflatable Muppet or something. But my response to some of the things that Mark said is on the next page, but I don't want to move forward if anyone has anything else.
well, I want to point one last thing out at the page at the bottom. It says, "You will put the blessing and the curse." Right? So that's an act of agency by man, right?
Yeah.
So,
So here, I will just quickly read a couple of little excerpts from this page. So partway down from the top, we have the excerpt from Deuteronomy, where it says, "You shall set up these stones on Mount Ebal and write upon them all the words of this law very clearly." And then he says here, "It's important to understand that the purpose of this ritual was to negate the natural symbolism of Mount Ebal, the actual pointless change, while affirming the natural symbolism of Mount Gerizim, the pillar of productivity and stability." And then there's just below that paragraph, it says here, "Cursed is the man who removes his neighbor's landmark," and all the people say amen. So there's this aspect of kind of it's almost like the flag of Gerizim is being planted, or maybe, we talked about banners a while ago, that there's the sort of the pillar or flag stand or something like that of Mount Gerizim is being planted at the top of Ebal. And so it's like, okay, this place is being annexed in a sense. And Matthieu does a good job, I think, of also kind of iterating something similar to what Mark was saying about that it isn't just, oh, well, I'm just not serving a principle or anything, but that there's the unknown principle that you're like actively serving it, even though you don't understand it. And there's this bit here where he says, there's the example of the positive natural law of space of thou shalt be true, and then there's like the natural law of time is thou shalt be false. So it's like you will serve the known principles or you will serve the unknown principles. But then there's the sort of the negative, as he calls it, statement of space, which is thou shalt not be false. So it's the sort of like double negative that's happening to create the positive. And And so he says, similarly, cursing Mount Ebal turned it into a negative pillar of space. So this reminded me a lot of, I was, as I've been kind of going through St. Paul's letters, I was reading the ones that he did to St. Timothy. And he goes and he talks about that the law is good if you use it lawfully, but also to realize that the law is also for the liars and the adulterers and the murderers and all these things. And it's like, you need that. But I was looking at this and this idea of, okay, you're clearly writing the words of the law on sort of as planting the flag on this cursed mountain. That's essentially what's also happening to the person who's going to be under the law. That they are in many ways sort of like a personal Mount Ebal that is having the flagstaff or the tablets or what have you of the very clearly written law put on them. And by doing that, the sort of double negative of like being put under a yoke or something like that to constrain them, which would normally be a negative thing. If you're already at like, it's like a straitjacket for a crazy person that hurts themselves or something like that. Like, it's not good to just put, I could just put a straitjacket on any of you guys while you're walking, somewhere. But if someone was going to hurt themselves otherwise, like that's a decent idea of the double negative. So for that same thing, like it's sort of like the almost like, I don't want to reduce it to something like training wheels, but there is a bit of that aspect with or even I guess you could say like kind of, we talked a bit about Karate Kid last night, where it's like this sort of thing of, oh gosh, you're just putting me to work around your house, and it's like, well, you lack discipline, you're lawless, like you have no idea what you want to do, you just want to go out and beat people up and everything and win fights, but you actually have no discipline. So like, I'm just going to put you to work, and and you're going to work for me for free as well. And it's like, that's, that sounds like defrauding somebody of their wages, but really it was a good like double negative in that scenario.
I'm getting some connections here. So when it says, there's the blessing of the one and the cursing of the other, but they're both serving a higher purpose, and they're both kind of good. For me, is bringing up with my intention. So, for example, how certain actions are made good or bad, not in themselves, but by their tellers, by their objective, and so on. So, for example, like certain people say, you should always be kind, you should always only give blessings, and so on. But no, the cursing has a place and a role, and it can be good. And for example, also like war and fighting and things like that, like they have a place and a time, and it's not the war in itself that's bad necessarily, it's the misapplication. Yeah.
So that was another thing that actually came up this morning as I was reading Paul's letters to Timothy, that he talks about like rebuking and reproving people when they're like openly sinning or drawing people into error or that type of thing, and he encourages it and says, like, you're not doing, it's not out of criticism or anything, it's correction. And that he even says that you should rebuke these people openly to even cast fear into the people around them, so that they can also see like, oh, you need to have a loud enough negative signal. And he even says that there was a couple of guys, and he even names them, and he says, I handed them over to Satan so that they could learn to not blaspheme. And it's like, there's a double negative right there. Like he's sent them for chastisement, and whether it was by his own words or that he cast them out, like kind of cut them off from the community temporarily for shame or something like that. And then that is sort of like their time in exile, or their time in the washing machine, just kind of spinning out a little bit until they're ready to reintegrate, and maybe you got to run them through a few spin cycles or something. But it's like you can't have that also, like you can't have the washing machine in the middle of the living room or something like that. Like there's appropriate places for that, and but yeah, it's definitely necessary. Like and as Mark says, like evolutionarily speaking, the negative signal is the one that is the most effective. Like that's the one that people hear. Unfortunately, like it would be nice if everyone responded to the blessings, but I have to say, like the people unfortunately, I've had to be what I thought was the bad guy for a lot of people, and like had to be firm with them. And honestly, they became better friends and better because I, verbally backhanded them a couple of times. And I didn't do it because I was like, "You're annoying, get out of here," or whatever. And that brings me to the nuke that happened to me last week. So I'm there, and I encountered this thing because something came to mind, and I was like, it was with the Scandal Stone things. So I was thinking about St. Peter being called Rock, and that there's the scene that I've seen a lot of people say this, like they've talked about it, but I've never actually seen somebody give this interpretation. And of course, the interpretation's like 1900 years old, and no one's talking about it anymore. That tends to be how it is. But I so usually it's this thing of, okay, he says, "On this rock I'll build my church," and then he says, "Get behind me, Satan," as soon as Peter goes and says, "Hey, you're not Messiah-ing correctly. Like, how are you supposed to go and like be killed and all this stuff? Like, no, let me tell you how it's done." Immediately after he's given a place of authority. And so in many ways, like it's like, okay, well, you made me your second in command. Let me counsel you. Like, there is kind of like an act of love there, but he's also kind of he's overstepping as well. That it's just like, well, you're not going to tell him how to do his job either. Like, you just got put in a place of authority, but also you just got the job like 5 seconds ago, guy. Like, there is that aspect. And so there's this excerpt that I found from an old writing where it says, "And Peter taking him," that is, taking him aside out of a tender love, respect, and zeal for his Lord and Master's honor, began to expostulate with him, as it were to rebuke him, saying, "Lord, far be it from thee to suffer death." But the Lord said to Peter, "Go behind me, Satan. You are a scandal to me," he actually says in some of in the translations. And he says, "These words may signify, be gone from me, but the Holy Fathers expound them otherwise. That is, come after me or follow me. And by these words, the Lord would have Peter to follow him in his suffering and not oppose the divine will by contradiction." So there's this aspect that I thought was really interesting of he takes this rock or mountain or founding place that he just named and then kind of set for a specific purpose, says, "You are a scandal to me," and then immediately gives him orders. And he doesn't. It would be kind of, and I was thinking about this, I was like, why didn't I realize this? That if you tell somebody to get behind you, like they're still standing right behind you. Like, that's not the same as saying get out of here or anything. It's not dismissiveness. It's reasserting the hierarchy. It's like, no, I'm leading. And like, you're not going to, like, I just gave you an order. You're not going to oppose me or anything. Like, let me show. And then it's kind of like let me show you how it's done. Like, no, it's also kind of like like not letting the cart go before the horse type of thing. That it's just like, okay, like let's the order of operations are here. The leader is going to be in front. Like, you are not going to, you don't get ahead of me, or don't get ahead of yourself, or that type of thing as well. And I thought that was extremely useful because I immediately saw, it was like, oh yeah, that's the same sort of pattern going on with the cursed mountain being then rebuked in a sense, or having the law clearly like written on them. And then of course after that, then Peter stumbles. Like, there's this kind of flipping where it's like, you were a scandal to me, and then it's just like structure imposed, and then Peter stumbles after that. And so there's a little bit of this kind of flipping that happens there.
So I don't know how you do this, but I wrote an article this week. I was planning to use it on Scandal, like to write it on Scandals. I don't know what happened there. Like, I still need to work it out, right? But what does it mean when something is a scandal, right? Like, it's in some sense it's beyond consideration, and that can be a good thing, but that can also be misapplied. Um, and so like this is the angle that I had to Scandal, is like, okay, like if we're scandalized by, I don't know, part of ourselves or whatever, or what someone else does, then we can't integrate it, right? Because we turn away from it. And that's what Peter did, right? Like, he was scandalized by this idea that Jesus would die, and he's like no, like no, because like at some level it's like, I'm not ready, right? to take up your place, but also like you still have work to do, right? It's
Right.
like, so yeah, and it's yeah, I don't think I can fully oversee it, but it has to do with inversion. Um, and to go back to the mountains, right? Like if you read the chapters Deuteronomy, that's the 27 to 30, he goes into the curses, and one of the curses is that you will be in the land of another under their dominion, right? So you're under a different yoke, right? So what does that mean, right? Like by a stranger you do not know, right? So that goes back to the unknown axle as well, right? But so there's an external agent in the place of authority, and you you are without power in relation to that agent, right? Like, so you're in slavery, right? So this also goes back to Egypt and stuff like that. Um, and so the curses that are being placed are basically the flipping, right? So like the mountain, and like I really like this idea of like what is a mountain when you're in a land? Well, it's like the point of reference for your orientation. And what is like that? That's a church, right? Like, because the church is also a point of reference for your orientation in the city or in the village. Um, and so what does it mean to switch mountains, right? Well, that means that you have to orient, like you have to relearn what it means to orient, because like the yeah, like the pathing will be different if you use the same orientation on the other mountain.
Yeah.
Um, and then well, so the mountain leads you somewhere. Um, and and yeah, I don't know if I can. Let me. Yeah. So oh yeah. So the other thing that it's doing, and this is also the thing I've been thinking a lot about, is the inside and the outside, right? So if you're taking any point as a reference, right? Like it automatically establishes an inside and an outside, because there's things that do participate and there's things that are outside, like they don't relate, or they conflict or whatever. And um, there's different rules, right? And there's proper ways, right? So like the things that are outside should not rule on the inside, for example. Um, and uh, and yeah, like you should not treat the outside as if it's the inside, because like that's the mistake that a lot of people are making nowadays. But yeah, I think there's a lot of fruitfulness in that framing, and connecting it to these terms. Um,
I
like
totally agree, and it's interesting how the Hebrews, they have this pretty clear structure of what they're supposed to bless and what they're supposed to curse. They have these two mountains. Like it's pretty sure, it's pretty structured, and it's not very ambiguous. It's like bless that, curse this. And nowadays people just don't have that. People bless all sorts of things that shouldn't be blessed, and they curse things that, shouldn't be cursed. And that is in itself a image of the flooded state, of the non-structured state. Like there's no positive axis, and it goes back to what Manuel was saying about how you have this point of reference, and it's established, and you can orient yourself. But when you're subjugated by this foreign, mysterious, unknown principle, then you no longer know what's even happening around you. Like the geography is totally changed, and you fall on your face.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that theme kind of comes up a lot, like biblically, usually, as kind of this, like when you talk about the the just blessing everything, just kind of like indiscriminately doing that. It's just like that's usually made in reference to, even at like the communal scale of a sort of like prostitution that's kind of happening, like this lack of discernment of just like, okay, like yeah, I'll just let like just anybody, just like who cares, and so yeah, that's usually when that terminology starts happening, then you start seeing all of that stuff kind of breaking down in the society at that time. I was thinking about, like, I also saw this sort of like the yin yang thing keeps coming up, as it tends to do. But just looking at these two mountains as well, so you have the Curse Mountain, or the Dark Mountain, which has the clearly readable, presumably not solid black pillars of written tablets up there, and then you have we kind of had this thing last week. We were talking about the one polarity implying the other one. And so you have like the explicit implication of like the white dot of the written law on top of Ebal, and then you have Garism, which doesn't necessarily have like it doesn't have necessarily something pointing to negativity, but it's like, oh well, which one is, what's Mount Garism? Oh, it's the positive mountain. And it's just like, okay, well, if there's a positive mountain, like that must sort of darkly imply that there's a negative mountain, or a cursed mountain. But I was thinking about this thing too of that you have this. So with Peter, that no one is asking questions. Like there's that kind of thing that everyone's like too afraid to actually ask any clarifying questions or anything. And so that also there's something of a, I don't know what you would call it, but in the Old Testament, especially, I don't know if it's in Leviticus or Deuteronomy, where they talk about that you should think about the law, you should like chew on it, maybe even like, not in a rude sense, but like cry about it, write songs about it, like what really kind of try to integrate it in these different ways and kind of figure out like, okay, what is it, what isn't it, and not to become legalistic, but it's like, okay, well, if you just had this put on you, like maybe you shouldn't have it as an unknown principle that you're standing under. Maybe you should try to participate in it better, and there be able to understand it. And I was thinking about that with this thing about mystery. So Manuel had this video with Ahmad that I really enjoyed about mystery, and this sort of thing of like there's a sort of treasure involved in scandal. So like if you can properly integrate the thing, then it is it's a stability stone. And I've heard people say before, like I'm pretty sure Bishop Robert Barron has said this, where you stumble, and some saint probably said it, but where you stumble, dig for treasure. And
it's the same with the dragon guarding the treasure.
Yeah, exactly. And I had this kind of definition that I had been running with, that I was like, oh, a mystery is a lot like a gold mine in a sense. But there is, like the dragon, there's dangers there. Like a lot of people die in gold mines, like that happens for sure. You need structure, and you need equipment, and leadership and cooperation, and that assumes that you're even allowed to be there in the first place. Like if you're actually lawfully digging in the place, there's a lot of kind of preconditions, and that if you don't have at least the majority of those things set up, then and this is something that gets touched on in the video as well, the sort of vice of curiosity as well, that you're not actually under a telos of any kind. You're just, it's more of like a emergence is good type of thing. Like, oh, what's the new novelty that I'm going to find? What's the thing I'm going to find on the other side of this wall? And it's like, well, it might be, something horrific, or you might actually just strike something that's going to bring the entire thing down on you. Like you can't just be, striking wildly with the pickaxe.
Yeah. So, about the sin of curiosity, I watched this video of a white knight being slain, which is highly amusing. Like, wow, white knights are bad. Because they're fools, like literally. um, so I think, well, what came out was the subservient role of the woman in marriage, right? And basically the idea was that, well, the man has absolute authority because he's representing God, right, who has absolute authority, and God doesn't have to justify himself, so why should the man, right? Like the man only needs to, well, be called to attention if he transgresses against God, right? And like if he stays within the will of God, then like why is there a problem? Like then you're the problem. So you just should obey, right? And when you were talking about, well, this hesitance of asking clarifying questions, it's like that is relating to the same problem, I think, right? Because
Mm.
like Jesus walks around as a teacher, and like so if he says something, like you you should see the world, or you should participate in faith, right? And then the answer will be revealed. And like so what's the purpose of a, well, maybe not necessarily a clarifying question, but a question, right? A question is an implicit accusation of not trusting the leadership, because you're challenging the leadership. And it's like, why are you challenging the leadership if you have faith in your leader? And like if Jesus felt he needed to clarify, then like he would have. And so it's kind of up to you to figure out why you don't understand, right? And maybe you can ask questions about what your role should be, right? Or like how you should participate, but you don't question the directive. Um, and uh, man, I forgot my connection. I'll leave it there.
But yeah, I definitely like that, and I like the bit about kind of that the submission is important, and I've thought about this with like you can look at this even with like animals and stuff. So you have wolves have something like 15 submissive behaviors, and chihuahuas have like 5, and poodles have 0. To just kind of give a little bit of context there. So it's like, okay, which animal would you most respect and fear out in the wild? And it's like that one's actually the one that's the most submissive of all of them.
Hmm.
So that's an interesting aspect. And then looking at these guys, like I bring up Jocko Willink a lot because I think he's a popular figure and he says a lot of the stuff in secular terms. That he talks about this thing of like he calls it like leading up the chain of command or something like that. But this thing of you're going to get a leader that's weak, like that's just you're going to end up at some point working at a job and like the person's not competent, and that's just how it's going to be. But the necessity also for the sake of unity, of building that relationship and even supporting them when they make stupid decisions, for the good of building that rapport. And maybe if you're more competent than the leader in this scenario, like of course there is, you have to actually have the discernment and not be like just arrogant or something like that. So there is a danger there. But ultimately, whether or not you are competent, or more competent than the leader, this sort of just, okay, I'm going to submit to the leader, even if they're like, okay, well, they want me to like go count light bulbs or something, and that's not my job. And it's like, okay, that's stupid, but I'm not going to create a fight over it or anything. Maybe there's, oh, this guy, this old guy wants me to like wipe his car, or something like that, or like paint his fence. Like that's kind of stupid. Like, but also, maybe I should just kind of submit and I'll figure it out later. And yesterday we talked about very briefly allegory and applicability. So J.R.R. Tolkien says that he's not really a fan of allegory. And I was thinking about this with respect to like Jesus' teaching with the like telling a whole bunch of allegories. And that like it's kind of explicitly said like the people who were listening to the allegories actually didn't understand it most of the time. And like but allegory even means to speak past your audience. And so there is this aspect of like, okay, well, the allegories were recorded. So it's like the people that were being spoken to are not necessarily the target audience for all of those things. But also there's the there's this aspect of people receiving the ability to even hear the message, and that, like, as far as the question goes, like, how you ask is also important, I think. So there's that a lot of times the apostles are like, what does this mean? And then sometimes that comes with like a light rebuke, a little bit of like, really, you didn't understand this. But also there's the kind of like, can you just like point me in the right direction here? Like, what can I do to actually absorb this correctly? And not of like, hey, you didn't make yourself clear enough. But it's like, hey, like, I'm a Muppet. Like, can you help me out a little bit? And I think about this also with respect to like, you have, I think it was Abraham and Sarah, where the angel comes to them and tells them that they're going to have a kid. And Sarah like laughs and says like, how can this be? I'm like 900 years old or something. And she was like 80, but even still. And she laughs, and it's like there's kind of, she gets rebuked for that, versus where you have like Mary, where she asks a clarifying question of like, oh well, how am I supposed to be a mom? Like, if I've like, I'm a virgin. And then it's just like, oh, here's like all the details you need, which is like one sentence. And then it's just like, Roger, like, let's do this, And it's like, that's pretty much it. There is that difference in kind of like, how you're asking the question, and if you're whether or not you've already submitted to the mission is a lot of times implied by how you're asking the question.
Yeah, and that's actually a really important point. The type of question matters, right? Not all questions are equal, and who you're asking it of and under what circumstances also matters. And I wanted to go back a bit to allegory and talking past your audience. I mean, if you're talking exactly where your audience is at, the odds that you're giving them anything new and novel are already lowered, but you're also not giving them any participation or anything to strive for. If you're talking past your audience, they have a goal, right? Like, oh, I need to understand this better, which is really important, right? And so people may see that as a bad thing, right? Or they may call it like condescending, and often when they use that word, they mean arrogant and not condescending, but it's not. Like, it's that's the problem. It has a utility that you're not understanding because you're in rebellion, you're in rejection, you're in skeptical cynicism, and you're not taking the submission seriously. Like, if you submit to this thing, it gives you a goal, and that can make you a nice deadly wolf, right? As opposed to a harmless poodle, which barks a lot and makes a lot of noise and causes a lot of disruption, but ultimately is not likely to harm you, especially since they don't travel in packs. So good luck, dog. That's all I get to say there.
So
I was just going to say really quick, like when they have those, sometimes they'll put like a really hard math problem for kids, and they'll just leave it on a board for like an entire year until they finally figure it out. That they have other stuff that they're doing, but they're just kind of like, okay, by the end of the year, like you should figure this out. Like, this is kind of the upper goal of the thing that you'll just kind of return to every now and then,
Yeah. So the thing that the Wolves brought out to me is like, okay, they're competent, right? So they're competent in relating to their realm of competence, and you're going to be blind to that as a poodle. Like, you can't participate in the 15 ways of submission, right? Or surrender. Like, and the other thing was I listened to a podcast about the organization of the state and the distinction between Europe and America and stuff like that. And they referenced a bunch of, I think from the 1800s, some guys who worked on how to organize the state. And the way that they oriented is how to deal with failure states, right? Because the failure state is gonna manifest, and so like what is the preferable failure state, and how can you like in some sense reduce the damage of that occurring, right? Or prevent it to escalating into the failure state. So that's maybe an interesting frame to engage with a bunch of things. So I think I think if you keep adhering to the principle or to the mountain, right, then that is the solution to not having a failure state because the mountain keeps renewing, right? Like the orientation, uh, like the mountain still gives you means of orientation, even if like you had a storm and all the paths are wiped out, like you can just make new paths, right? Like uh, so there's a permanence there that if you remain faithful, it will revivify the relationships, I guess. Um, and I think the point that I wanted to make with the questions is if you're asking a question, are you ready for the answer? Because if you're not, why are you asking? So, yeah. Um, and yeah, so this talking past your audience, like I that's engaging with the poetic, right? So you're because you have to give a participation to your audience, right? Because else they can't resonate. But they can't have full participation, right? So you need to use this fractal layering of meaning uh, so that there's more in what you say, but there's still there's still things for the lesser, I guess. And yeah, so that I don't know, like there's a skill there. Um, there's and I think that's what Jesus did, right? Like he just provided these things where you're like, wait, that's in there. Like it keeps popping things out. Um, and then you realize, oh, like he wasn't really pointing at the thing that I thought he was pointing at, or whatever, right? Even though what I thought was correct, right? Like I just saw like the toe of the thing.
Yeah, it's like when those lessons are kind of being given, that because of the self-similar fracticality, like you're getting it actually at all scales at once, you know. So it's like, oh, I recognize that implication. It's just like, oh, actually, it's not just that. It's not just in that area. No, you know.
I don't know. I think with talking past your audience, you're trying to give them not just one way of participating. You're trying to give them you're trying to point to maybe like several ways of participating at the same time. So
Yeah, that's what true participation should be, right? So we'll call it autistic participation would be like single goal, single method, single process. And poetic participation, which is how you grow, it's reciprocally opening by definition, is not single anything, right? So it does have, to your excellent point, Christopher, it does have that aspect of opening things up and allowing different engagements for different people, right? Hopefully to the same end state or a similar end state or end states along the same lines or something, as opposed to single participation in a single action, which is always reducible to a linear discrete procedure, um, or set of procedures, which is just an illusion of complexity or something, where it's just complication. And that's actually important to realize that there are different ways to participate, and if it's just, well, you do this because of this, that's already wrong. That might be partially true, but it's not true enough. And that's where it lies hide in a grain of truth sort of thing, right? Obvious lies that are just flat out completely wrong in every way are easy to spot, and those aren't the ones you have to worry about necessarily.
Um, well, so we can kind of go back to the curse thing because like I do think, and Mark, you're gonna probably resonate with this, right? It's like uh at a certain point, the obvious lies aren't obvious lies anymore. Because if you're too flooded, like they might seem true. Um, so that might also be a relative or a perspective thing, right? Like how obvious is the obvious, and what does that even mean? Um, so, Castle, you wanna keep us going, or
Yeah, I was just taking a quick note. So let me see. Now I think so. We have this bit at the bottom there. I'm probably skipping a lot. I'm just kind of going through. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on the next page.
okay, we'll
Uh,
go to the next page.
so
Like
we
I
have.
think we should go through all of the curses and the blessings. We just like have everybody say what they see at some level.
Do you want me to go down the list and read them?
Well, you start off with the first one. Like what does it mean to follow the law?
Okay. So I've kind of talked briefly about that you have this double negative aspect of taking on the yoke so that you can then be enabled to do something. So in the Exodus series that Jordan Peterson did, there's an interesting part that I really like where they talk about this sort of condescension that takes place when you play chess. So you take on these additional rules, and then that then gives you an entirely new way of participating with those pieces and on that board and with the other person and everything. Otherwise, that these are just kind of objects on a table that you can kind of like place them there, and that's kind of it. But if you take on these additional rules, then you can actually do something there. And the also just this morning, I read St. Paul talking about the law, and he was talking about how for those who are properly participating in it, like he gives a few different examples from different walks of life, and he says, a soldier doesn't get involved in civilian matters, but he does his work for like to please his superior, essentially, like in submission to the mission that he's given. And then also that an athlete can't be crowned a winner for whatever particular sport they're playing unless they're actually abiding by the rules in that. So there is a consequence of not only you're missing out on structure that you need for stability, but there's also there's the possibility for merit by operating within a lawful space that you wind up, okay, sure, you get your not freedom but license by turning away from the law, but then also like there's no opportunity for merit there. So it's like, did you actually get anything?
Yeah, like everybody wants to go or can go. I guess I'll close the law thing.
I think what I'm seeing most in this is about inhabiting the homeland is a very big deal for me. Sort of not just because of family history, but just the history of my people, the Latvians. Um, because partially from my own time abroad, I've come to realize that not everyone has the kind of relationship that the Latvians have to their land, because we've been here since prehistory, so like the same kind of borders, pretty much the same place. There's like a there's like a really strong tie and authority and just a mutual love for the land and of the land for us. And so exile is very, very disruptive. Like going anywhere else is super disruptive. And there's this kind of cosmopolitanism that I see in other places. So, just through globalization and so on, like other people actually do still struggle with being away from the homeland, and it brings up these civilizational or national questions that Matthew talked about in his last interview, about how there's these kind of questions that are answered. Well, he was talking about Christ, but yeah, that there's these problems, and that makes me reflect on how the Latvians, even though we do in a way inhabit our own homeland, how we can still, like, we still have problems, and there's still questions to be answered. Yeah, that there's like the fulfillment is not exactly here, despite us, getting independence and things like that, you know. which people did think would be the fulfillment in a way. Yeah.
Christopher?
Oh, I'm just thinking a lot about the benefiting from work versus not benefiting from work, and how that's related to proper participation in what you're working in. That's let's see. I don't know. That's I don't know. Being you think you're working like this goes to like related to like being directional versus orienting. Like you pick a direction and say I'm going to work for this thing, and that ends up being unproductive because you're missing everything that's important in like being narrow-minded. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. I don't know what else to say right now, but
Okay, Mark?
Sure. I mean, health and life, right? Like that's we're sort of given life, and hopefully we stay healthy. And if you've ever not been healthy, you know why why it's a blessing when you are. And that's important to people who understand that, right, through the experience. It's very hard to tell somebody who's not been sick with, say, a chronic illness, for example, or had a serious like bout with cancer or whatever, how bad that is. And that's because they don't see the blessing, right? Because they haven't had the contrast of the sickness and death, and we've removed ourselves from that largely, and I think that's part of the problem. But yeah, I think it's important to keep that in particular in mind.
So I I have one thing in mind when I suggested this. And then something happened, right? So I'm just like, okay, like let me Castle pointed at the one thing, and then we started like crossing things, and I was like, okay, like what am I gonna say? And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? It sounds like it's a recipe, like this, and then it's like, oh wow, it's seven, and it ends with serving God. I'm like, wait, did Matthieu intentionally pick this? Right? Like where's this coming from? But like the way I'm looking at it now is okay, like there's a law, right? You follow it, and that allows for existence of something within the law, right? And then something gets established, right? Like that's the space that's being captured, right? And then because there is an establishment, right? Like now we have something, we have an identity. So now we have held, right, which is the occupation of that identity, and life, which is the expression of the identity. And so now we're getting standards, right? They appear, um, and then right you can see whether the action that you take is contributing to health and life or not, right? So now you have a standard to judge even action in the world. And then, right, you are blessed, right? So you become more than that which is not in the identity. Um, so yeah, and then you're established, right? And then you have a functional society, right? And like you could see all of these steps having a failure, right? A failure condition. Or you fail to remember them, right? So you fail to realize the function of the law. You fail to realize the space that is established by the law, right? And so you're just not attending to part of it or whatever, right? Like, and all of these things they bring in curses, right? That sounds like a really fruitful framework to judge created things. um, so yeah, I don't see the full implications, but uh, but yeah, there must be a participation with it, right? But also, right, like there's the first thing that got brought up with me with the law. It's like, well, the law is there uh, to point people who don't, or correct people who don't know the law, right? But like there's something else than the law, right? There's just uh, staying true, which is not to the law, right? It's to the mountain, or to the principle that is established. Um,
That
so yeah, that's interesting. Maybe we can like bring that back in relationship to time, right? So there's this establishment, and then there's a rejection or overturning of what is established, right? And then new establishments need to happen, right? And only if you follow the highest principle, you can do that correctly. Because if you're following a lower principle, your world literally collapses uh, after you get a revolution.
I was thinking about this with respect to just this sort of thing of burning off dead wood. So we talked about this a bit yesterday, that you have incremental improvement, but there's also incremental deterioration as well. And there's this sort of thing of like, well, you're either advancing or you're backsliding, and maybe there's like a middle ground for about 5 seconds as you transition from one to the other. But otherwise, like, and I was using the example of kind of like cleaning your dishes, like the sort of cleansing of the vessels thing, where say if you have a plate or something, like, yeah, you don't have to wash the plate immediately after you eat if you're going to go get seconds or something like that. But if you leave it there for 3 days and then use it for another meal, like that's kind of not acceptable. And like there are consequences to that. Like that can even result in exile. Like if you have, like food fragments or something like that, or like some sort of sauce that's still on there, and then you put a new meal on it, like that's disgusting. It reminds me of kind of those things, like also with the law existing as a sort of an indictment. Like if you've ever been into like a restaurant bathroom where there's a sign that says employees must wash hands or something, but it's just like, well, like you needed to put that here, like the employees don't know to wash their hands. That if they were operating with the higher principle of I'm going to provide good service because I'm grateful for my job and all, like that, and like it goes even higher than that. But it's just like, no, if we're all the way down here where you have to remind them to wash their hands, like maybe that's there's some problems with that. And then when people don't do that, like that results in exile of some sort. You might get fired, maybe somebody gets E. coli. Like there's a lot of these different things that can wind up happening to you. And so yeah, just kind of seeing that there with the health and life thing, and then also just kind of tying into as far as like the communal aspect, thinking about there's an earlier letter of St. Paul where he's talking about like worthiness when participating in the mass. So he says, that those who are kind of like receiving communion unworthily, he actually says that they're getting sick and dying as a consequence of it. Like it was like he's not saying, oh, these things that, oh, you guys are not taking care of certain things. He actually says like the condition of your soul as you go and you participate in the mass is actually contributing to your sickness and death. And like he says it explicitly at that point. And then so what do you do if you are like unworthy? That there is an aspect where an authority has to essentially be in charge of cleansing you, the vessel, and then you're reintegrated. that you have to, once again, kind of, you got to go through the dishwasher, and then now you're ready to be put back into the community. But that's something that, that's actually a really major problem that's going on right now. But I found that really interesting, that it was, of course, a problem also 2,000 years ago. So there's nothing new.
So I actually wanted to pick up on this idea, right? That you put a reminder somewhere. Because I'm connecting that to explaining. And the first thing that came up for me is what does that do to the spirit? Right? Like I got really annoyed with Veki that he was pointing at the container that he was participating in, right? So in other words, you're breaking the participation. Like if you keep pointing things out, you draw things away, right? And that's a transgression, right? And that can break the communion effectively, right? Now it doesn't have to, right? And there's different degrees of severity, right? Like I can slap you in the face, right? And that will definitely break whatever participation you're in. But there's lesser versions that still rough things up, right? And then like things need to settle down again. Um, and so I was thinking about, well, as a leader, if you constantly explain or justify yourself, what does that do? Well, it shows that you're not confident, right? It invites the same behavior in the people that follow you, right? Because like okay, I just explained myself, so like, well, why wouldn't he need to explain this other thing? Like it's just obvious, right? So you're creating this dynamic, and it's not necessarily malicious, right? But it is subverting. Um, so yeah, that's what I got.
I think that ties in well with what you had said before about questions. That if there's a person that's in authority, like also that if the authority is already just explaining themselves anyway, as though a question has been asked, like there is that kind of aspect of, okay, maybe this leadership is weak, but then also with the way that you could ask certain questions, like I was thinking about this with respect to why versus how questions. So if somebody tells me, hey, I need you to do something, and like I've never done it, then I'll say like, oh, how do I do that? And it's like that sort of implies submission. Like, okay, yeah, like I'm on board, but also I've never done it before. Can you give me a little more information so I can do it? Versus if I say why, so they say, hey, I need you to do this. Why? Like I have just called their authority into question by doing that. And that also, like, this is something that you can kind of notice, and people use it kind of tactically as well, that if you want to knock somebody off their guard or verbally slap somebody in the face to break their participation, you ask them why instead of how. And like it's an affront to their authority as kind of it, even just a like same level interlocutor as well. That's an interesting sort of positive and negative participation in that one. But sometimes you need to break somebody out.
Yeah, I never do that. Why would I do that?
Yeah. I think that's all I've got on this page. Does anyone have anything?
Yeah, I was a little bit pondering the meaning of under the effects of the curse. It says you will serve other gods of wood and stone. Maybe that's emergence because they're like basic.
Yeah,
that might be. Okay. I don't know. That might be related to like because you're serving another god. You're like carving a symbol for this god that you're going to worship. That's I don't know. That seems maybe related to the somewhat lower level signage or something. Like you're pointing down instead of up with the thing with what you're directing your attention towards.
Mhm. And there's a material manifestation of that too. So there's kind of like the descending hierarchy of materials, of kind of like gold, silver, copper, and then you go all the way down. And it's like, hey, if you're making this thing out of clay or wood or something like that, like that's pretty low versus like worshiping God of like light and spirit, you know, like that's even higher than the materials you can actually craft something out of, versus like, oh yeah, let me just grab whatever I've got lying at my feet and then worship that, you know.
Yeah, it's also it's a lack of refinement, and crafting something out of wood, right? Is the refinement of the unrefined, right? So it like you should do that out of gold properly, right? Um, um, so the thing about God bringing nations against you, right, is it's the external, right, holding a perspective that is superior to yours, right? Even though it's the external, because it can conquer you, and
Well,
and
I don't know that that's a perspective, Manuel. I mean, it could just be force.
yeah, but if like this is talking about meaning, right? Like it's not talking about physical nations. It's talking about established principles.
I don't see that in here, but also it doesn't matter. I mean, it says besiege you in your gates until your high and fortified walls are down. So again, they could just be stronger. It's not necessarily a matter of perspective. I mean, perspective, if you don't have
Yeah,
eyes to see,
but
perspective
that's
doesn't make a difference.
yeah, but what does make a nation stronger? Well, they have superior technology.
No, not necessarily. They could have overwhelming forces, or they could have, more of a goal. Like in fact, that's how people win battles, right? Is how motivated are you? Not what your numbers are. How motivated are you, right? There's lots of factors. It's not, and it's never the material factors. Actually, it does not matter what equipment you have, right? If you're Ukraine and we give you M1 Abrams tanks, you'll lose them all, and they did. So like that, it has nothing to do with it. There's not a force doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
That's part of the problem.
but technology doesn't mean it means the means to wield things, right? But whatever, like
Right,
um,
but just because you wield it doesn't mean you wield it well. And just because you wield it well doesn't mean you're motivated enough to win. Like it's a very complex thing. There's a lot going on. And that's the problem. You can't reduce it to superior perspective or greater force or better technology. I mean, none of those things win battles. None of them. And if you study war history, you'll find that out real quick. I mean, there's no reason for some of these super technologically advanced nations not to have taken over the world, but for right, and it's the but for that matters.
And I bring this back to the text. So there's the last sentence in the paragraph that's at the middle of the page. It says that sickness leads to eventually to the complete loss of all natural resources. So there's this state of you holding the natural resources, and then it's sort of like you losing them. And because the resources are like towards the bottom of that hierarchy of like the covering of the mountain, it's sort of like you you are actually able to access those resources by the power of the spirit that you have, and then the sickness is the sickness in the spirit that leads to you no longer being worthy of those resources, so they sort of fall away from you. So it's not so it's a state where the materiality, where the quantity, the size, and the resources that are available to you are actually a manifestation or a derivation of the principle of the spirit of the tellers.
But I'd like to add also that there is this sort of upside down mountain thing. So I'm looking at the quote there from Deuteronomy, and there is this sort of like there's a bunch of things all in the same category. So you do have, okay, maybe the other nation is stronger or better organized or more motivated, but you also have the fact that they speak a completely different language and you've never met these guys before. And they're eating your food, like the food that you made to kind of build yourself up, like they're eating it. And then your eyes are down looking at like wood and stone carvings that you made from your own hands. And that so there's also this bit that Matthieu writes at the bottom where he says, important to the symbolism is the concept of the stranger or other as the flip side of a revealed identity. The name of God is the identity of the nation of Israel, and anything that does not express that principle is the stranger or the other. So the sort of outsider, different language, different, maybe they have different weapons. Maybe it's just the fact that they're just different soldiers altogether. You don't know what their motivations are. They're just eating your food and attacking your gate. Like they're just kind of, it's just like, all right, well, who are these guys? And, and of course, like around that time, you've also got like giants and all this stuff where it's just like, what is going on here? That there's just all these crazy guys that are horrifying to even look at. And, I think wasn't there one guy that had like 6 toes and 6 fingers on every hand and foot or something like that? So you got like these kind of like mutant giant guys and everything. And it's just like everything about them is foreign. Like that's about as foreign as you can possibly get. And then all the while your attention is downward.
Okay.
So at the top of this page, I had already kind of talked about this. The following the law implies working for your own benefit or the benefit of your identity. Doesn't necessarily mean that you yourself are getting paid, but there is that advantage of serving the larger structure that you kind of, and Manuel has kind of talked about this a lot of other occasions where it's like, even if that you participate in the glory of whatever that thing is that you're supporting, it's not necessarily, and people like, there might be kind of a complaint that a lot of people would have, oh, well, like I'd like to profit from whatever my work is and everything, but also to remember that a lot of the guys, as much as I like Diogenes, like the guy was homeless just to flex on the authorities. Like that was actually just to have something to hold over them. He actually made himself homeless. And it's just like there is that sort of aspect of people will do a lot for honor and for glory, but there's also, but you can receive that through support, not criticism, or is the cynicism. And then the consequences of not doing that, interestingly, it says serving time in exile. And it's like, what is that? Imprisonment and homelessness. Like those are a couple of manifestations of the serving time in exile by not participating within the identity.
Mm-hmm. Actually, the solution to exile is authority, right? And yeah, like so, it says somewhere that there's a place for everyone in the house of the Lord. So that solves your exile.
Yep.
Like you just set yourself in the house of the Lord. Yeah, you might have a room like really far off.
Yeah.
So going to the graph here, like I'm looking at it, and I just like, okay, now I understand what blessing is. Blessing is the contribution to the establishment of identity or personhood or whatever. And the curse is detracting. Like it's the renunciation of that identity.
Yeah, blessing is increase in order, and ultimately lowering of the waters, right? Which is something you probably missed in the diagram. Whereas a curse is an increase in the waters and a decrease of the order. But people don't necessarily think of it this way because they think of order as something that will say they can do or something beneath them. But order gives you a place within something bigger than you. And it gives you a way of participating and a way of contributing and a way of cooperating in something that you can't do as well by yourself. And that's what order is for. Order is for bigger things than you, not only for smaller things than you, because our existence is comprised within a self-similar fractal. And so you can understand some aspects of larger order by looking at smaller order, but not all of them, because scale matters and the rules change slightly at different scales. And so that's actually really, all of that is really important to understand. So you're blessed when you get ordered, right? When there's an increase in order and a decrease in the floods, you're blessed. Because it just enables you to have a role in contributing to something greater than you are now. And therefore you can grow, right? You can't grow otherwise. Order also protects you from a bunch of things. And the problem is, like everything else, including you, it's imperfect, right? And that's where people don't like that, because they're looking for perfection and redemption and things like that. And you need to go with the best available answer instead of the perfect available answer from your perspective.
Yeah, the way you benefit yourself with your work basically is by working for the benefit of the imperfect thing that you're a part of.
Well, yeah, Christopher, but also the goal of your work is not in the working or in the results of the work. It's in what the work enables, right?
Right.
And part of what
Yes.
work enables is for you to be protected. So, for example, having tried to run several companies, I don't like marketing. I'm not even bad at it, right? I just don't like it. And so if I'm in a company where my role is not marketing, then it's just better for me. I'm protected from that at the same time, that's good, because then I can keep my eyes on the higher goal, not just the tech work that it will say I'm good at or like to do or whatever, but I can keep my eye on the higher goal of what that work enables, like what is being afforded by any kind of work being done, right? And everyone's answer is going to be different. Like, I can feed my family, I can buy a boat, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, right? It only matters that you have your eyes on that rather than on the immediate results. But it's a good point. You also have to keep in mind the immediate results, otherwise you won't get them.
Yeah, I like the bit about also just the idea of, okay, maybe like your place is way off, but you're still integrated in some way. And like even once again this morning, St. Paul just talks about everything in like 3 pages, but but he talks about like that even like a king has use for like clay vessels and stuff, and that like that can still be set aside for a very dignified purpose. And that I was thinking also, and now see it clearly in this diagram too. And thank you for pointing out the lowering waters. But I also was paying attention to the little dots with the question marks there, that you can see that all of these other ones get kind of subsumed into the hierarchy. And then the one that was actually the lowest is now closer to the surface of the water than any of them were at the beginning. And so like the stranger is still right outside the thing. And it reminds me, there's this thing I read. So Saint Ephrem the Syrian wrote like this thing called Hymns on Paradise, and it's poetry. And he has a thing where he talks about that he's kind of reflecting on paradise and this kind of like past and future paradise. And he says, that he would be perfectly satisfied to be outside the gate of paradise, or outside the walls. With the dogs, he actually says that he would be perfectly happy there, because the conditions for him would actually be better than anybody currently has it, no matter how well off they have it. If he's just hanging out with the dogs outside, the fact that he can even just like hear people enjoying themselves, and maybe someone will visit him every now and then, like that's still way better than he could ever attain. And I just kind of see that, and I'd see like, oh, there's Saint Ephrem and the dogs, like right outside. Instead of maybe water, you could see it as like a hedge fence or something like that. But of course, in his submission and also the association with dogs and everything, like Saint Ephrem the Syrian's not outside the gate. Like that's just not the case. But so there is also that kind of bit, that him resigning himself to, yes, I'll be the one all the way at the bottom. Like he's probably on the second rung there, most likely.
Yeah,
Well,
so that
I want to point out a couple of other things. I like what you said about integration, Castle. That's really good. A lot of people would rather be unintegrated than be integrated in a place they don't want, right? And that's a lot of the rebellion that we see. It's like, look, maybe you just suck. And so, your role is limited and you're not Elon Musk and you're not going to be ever, no matter what everybody else does. And you need to be able to accept that and accept where you can contribute, even if that's not what you want. And that's the problem, right? Like maybe you have to just go to damn church and do what they tell you instead of saying, oh, the church needs to agree with my ridiculous ideas on how things should be done or what the proper interpretation of the Bible is or whatever, right? And that's a lot of people are like that. They're just in rebellion. They don't see it as rebellion. They see it as redemption and perfection and saving of the thing bigger than them. You're not doing that. That's never going to happen. Right? You need to just integrate where you're at, and maybe you can improve on where you're at if you integrate, but you can't otherwise. And I also want to point out in the diagram, you'll notice that the middle diagram adds some mediators that aren't there. And so the blessing is in the mediation to some extent, right? And so now you don't have direct access to that highest, to the identity. You have a mediator between you, and the highest, and it's also the establishment of hierarchy, right? Two of the higher dots move up, become not black but grayish, right? And then the rest integrate, and the potential comes closer to the structure, all at the same time. And the idea of mediation is important because you can talk about hierarchy and a lot of people just see very flat hierarchies, but you actually want a very deep hierarchy to protect you from the tyranny of the king, for example, among other things. And people don't like that, but also that's the way it is, and it's better for you whether you accept it or not.
so there's this parable about, well, it's not a parable. This part where Jesus has this foreign woman and she's begging him to heal her or whatever, and he's like, "No, you're not from Israel. Like I didn't come here for you." And she's like, "No, like even the dogs get scraps from the table."
Mhm.
And so basically she's on the outside, but she's still receiving the blessing because she's within the realm of the blessed. Um, and Jesus recognizes that and he turns to her, right? So uh, and maybe that also says something about integration, right? It's like, okay, like that's the means of integration, right? Because like now she's been recognized, right? So like now she has a part because she's not other anymore. Like she's not in, but now there's the intermediary stage.
And in her submission as well, like she goes in mediating intercession for her sick daughter as well. So by her getting integrated, which also involves a test that she submits to, literally accepts being called a dog. Also relevant, to the thing that that by doing that, a lot like this kind of diagram here, that she's kind of raised up, and then her daughter, who's off, like just kind of stuck in bed sick, is also raised up at the same time through that mediation as well. And I was thinking about this thing too, that sort of the rebellion thing and not wanting to serve. It kind of reminds me of that thing. We were like, oh, would you like serve in heaven or rule in hell or whatever? And it's just like, do you really know what you would rule over? Like exactly. And like having to maintain that in like a high entropy situation, like, okay, here's like a 1 foot by 1 foot patch of dirt. And then you can wear this like styrofoam cup with a bite taken out of it as your crown. Like what exactly, like, did they actually do anything for you? Like being in charge of something that's not there, as opposed to just like, oh, or you can just kind of be a part of something that's not going to wind up ruining your life. And like you can experience that in like your day-to-day life as well. It's just like if you're constantly rebelling against the structure that you're in, then yeah, that results in being fired, or that results in like not being able to participate fully with your peers. That type of thing happens shockingly often.
So, I had a lot of highlights in the part about Deuteronomy 68, which also shows you why I got stuck so long in Deuteronomy 68. Like, holy cow, it's such a long text, and you see how long that sentence is, right? Or that part, that verse. So it's interesting, right? So the ships are referencing the flooded state. I I do feel like, okay, so there's something in the ship, right, that you're kept from things. It's also a technology, something built by yourself to protect you from the waters. Um, so it also has a isolationary quality. Um, so and then the ships go back the same way, right? But like we're just gonna assume that they didn't come by ships, right? Because that's weird. Um, so like what happened, right? Like what is the same way? So there's this saying that there's what something that's established and then it's revoked, right? And like it's in the same uh, vein or something. Um, and then you get into the selling yourself as slaves, but no one will buy you, right? So you're you want to partake, right? And you're in some sense you're offering that what you have, right? And nobody wants it. Like so you're a complete reject. Because you don't adhere to something, right? Like they still have an adherence, but you can't integrate in their adherence, even. So that's what I got from there.
Yeah. Well, there's that thing too, like I don't like to kind of harp on it, but the thing of kind of like the prostitution thing of like, oh, you're just blessing everything, or oh, yes, I'm going to kind of like give my consent to these things, or I'm going to sell myself, and then it's like that's even, like, is it even worse that it's just no one will buy? Like actually, that it's like that is a horrific thing, and I think there's actually a lot of people doing that now. Also in like explicitly in that scenario, but also like in a lot of other areas, they're just kind of, in many ways selling themselves or, their souls or what have you. And then it's just like, well, it's kind of it's a buyer's market,
Yeah, and like even if they buy you, right? Are they buying what you're offering, or are they buying something else? Like
Right.
that's also um yeah. So at the bottom of the page, I had uh children born from between her feet, which is a really curious uh phrasing. But like something between your feet means that you've established a space, right? For something to be born into. Uh, and she will eat them in secret. So I I don't like the word. Like I got pretty triggered when I read the word secret. Um, but secret means not visible. Uh, but then I thought a little bit about it because like not visible might be in the open. Right? Like it might not be hidden. Like secret things can be hidden by you not catching the meaning. Um,
Yeah, but
so
that's basically the devouring mother. That's what right. So between the feet just means it's birth. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to go any deeper. So she's, you know, hiding the fact that she's eating the children in this case, right? Which is literally the devouring mother. That's exactly where that comes from. And yeah, you know, it's hidden under the empathy or sympathy or you know, kindness or whatever, tolerance flag. But really it's a consumption. And that's why it's secret. That's why people don't see it.
And the secret might also be that there are people that are complicit in it, like multiple people keeping that secret. Like there's a scenario that I'm aware of where in my area there is a food pantry. And so like specifically for just people who needed food or whatever, there's government grants, there's, you know, benefactors and these types of people that will go and they'll volunteer, they'll give the stuff. And the people managing this place could also go and they could reach out to companies and say like, hey, if you have excess or if you guys, you know, want a tax write-off or something like that, we're looking for, you know, insert whatever type of food or, you know, hygiene product or something like that. And there came a point where the someone I knew who was working there saw that the management and the workers were eating the food and taking some of the stuff home and sometimes making requests for additional stuff. Like they're taking the fruits of this like tree that people are supposed to be able to go to and take from, or this is kind of like an emplacement version of kind of like the outside of the crops or of the fields that the sojourner and the you know, the widow and these types of people can kind of pluck from without having to pay. And the interestingly, this place they also required a certain level of registration as well, which is kind of contrary to that teaching. But these, so you would have like the management was aware that like the front desk people were just like, you know, oh, they ordered all these snacks for specifically for children, and they're just eating them, like actually eating the entire boxes worth of the stuff. And so the place is actually like self cannibalizing. And then you start to see an even greater breakdown where the people who were in charge of doing the orders, like one of them had some sort of, what do you call it? Like one of those obsessive compulsive type things where she didn't like a certain number and like she didn't like to order over a certain number or something like that. So it would always, she would order less than she could order and then the people were eating it. So it's like you're minimizing the amount of fruit and then self cannibalizing. And then it's just like, how are you actually, and it, of course the answer is they're not actually doing the stuff, but it was being done in secret, but everybody knew about it in that place, you know, and ultimately it led to like the departure of the person I knew because they were trying to revivify it, but it's like you're outnumbered, you know, 5 to 1 or whatever. So there's only so much you can do.
Right, and another way to look at it is it's the forgetting of the principle.
Mhm.
Like if you forget the principle, you can no longer judge whether what you're doing is in adherence to it, right? So you end up contradicting the principle with the assumption that you're adhering to it.
Mhm.
Yeah, like how in the world is a mother going to eat her children if a father is around? Like even in secret. Like if there's a caring father around, and that maps onto the principle being absent and the cannibalization.
What's funny about that, or you know, not in an actual humorous way, but more a sad way, that this place had actually originally been established as kind of an offshoot of a local church, and that it became secularized, and they actually removed all of the religious connotation from the website and everything like that. And it was like actually right after that that the deterioration started happening. Like they went astray, you know, like they lost their star, as Manuel said before. And it's just like that is really really useful that you see that sort of thing. Like you see the left side of the or kind of the middle part of this diagram and then the left side, like you actually see it in action, like just one after another, you end up in that spot.
Talking about stars, there's a part in the Bible, I don't know where. I think it might be actually in this part with the Deuteronomy, where it says, "There will be few of you, but many stars in heaven." Right? It's like the flipping, right? Like okay, like there's much things to adhere to, but there's not many people adhering to them.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on so we can hopefully finish this.
We did one chapter. Ugh.
Um, so yeah, like so you have the eating of the offspring or the fruits, the self-eating of the fruits, and then you have cannibalism, which is the eating of the body or the loss of body, or I think Gustav had a good way of framing it because I think it's also the losing of health, the no longer being able to generate the fruits of the body. Um,
But I think
yes,
something that'll come up that'll be relevant next week that I thought would be relevant this week is this aspect of kind of cyclical time being associated with rest and recreation, but only being possible as long as spatial reality holds. So outside of actually having the structure properly maintained, then you just get completely overturned. So you get this thing of, okay, like you'll have no repose among the nations. There will be no rest for the sole of your foot. You'll say in the morning, I wish it were evening. And in the evening, you'll say, I wish it were morning. That you end up with this thing where, okay, and I think most people can probably relate to this, that, okay, like you're stressfully watching your favorite show or something like that. Like some sort of thing is happening that, oh, normally I would feel revivified by this thing, but my goodness, I just feel restless. Or you wake up tired, like that type of thing happening to you. And there is this kind of like, okay, the space has been effectively, the gates have been breached by this foreign enemy, like that type of thing has happened. And it's like, that's not time for fun and games, or like listening to music or anything like that when you get a foreign invasion, or your house is overgrown, or a pipe has burst and now it's flooding, and that type of thing. And then there's an interesting kind of restating of the secret part. So there was the bit about the woman eating the child in secret, but then there's this thing that says, there in Deuteronomy 29:28, that the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we may perform all the words of this law. So there is also that aspect of like, you're not supposed to be doing, stuff that if you're abiding by the known principles, then why are you concealing yourself? Like you must be, you know, unless you're dealing with like a double negative situation where you're camouflaging yourself because there's an unknown principle like being predatory upon you or something like that. If you're in stable space, there's no reason for deceit, unless it's for rest and recreation, like jokes and that type of thing, like sleight of hand for entertainment, that type of stuff.
yeah, like I I think secret is better looked at as hiddenness,
Mm.
right? Um, like there, its identity not known
Yeah.
to you, right? Like I don't think intentionality plays a part in it. Um, and so the things the things that are not known to you belong to the Lord, right? Like and then you maintain hierarchy because that way you never fail, right? So in other words, you have to have reverence to the things that you don't know because well, like it's with Chesterton's fence, right? Like you don't know why it's there.
I think that goes with the questioning authority as well. That it's like, okay, well, if it wasn't revealed to you, and like it wasn't a fact of, oh, you weren't listening correctly or something like that, and it was trying to be revealed to you, but that if you're trying to grasp at this thing that wasn't given to you yet, which is kind of a recurring problem, then it's like, yeah, it's that there is also this kind of one implying the other as well a little bit, that like that if it belongs to God specifically, and like it doesn't belong to you, then okay, like why are you clutching at it? And also like you should be kind of maintaining these things that were given to you, because also it's also kind of not yours, even if it is given to you. Like it's not exclusively yours. It even says they belong to us and our children forever. So there's this not just kind of like, okay, now I'm going to possess it.
Yeah, and this again goes into when are you able to receive, right? So if we look at Jesus, right, like he would tell you when you're ready. Um, so like, why are you reaching for something that you're not ready for, right? Because like at a certain point, you're pulling it down, right? Like you're pulling it down to your level, right? Like if you're not high enough to interface with it correctly, you will flatten the world, because that's what it means to pull things down. So I'm wondering, do we kind of feel complete?
Well, I think I want to, in rereading this last paragraph here, this quote secret symbolizes the hidden aspect of God as the creator of all phenomena, completeness. That's also the unknown unknowns, which is also the unknowable unknowns. In other words, there's always a secret, right? Which leaves space for potential and miracle and all that stuff. And also, you're not getting rid of it, so stop trying, because it's a waste of your time. And, I think that's another aspect people miss. Like they miss, no, there's a secret, right? There's something that pre-existed you that you'll never know all of, ever, no matter what happens. Even if, a miracle happens and you live forever, it wouldn't help because you weren't there at the beginning. So it's too late, right? And so there is an unknown unknown, and there are unknowable unknowns, at least from your perspective. And it doesn't matter if somebody else can know them, because just because somebody knows something doesn't mean they can tell anybody else. And it doesn't mean that if they can tell everybody else, that they can tell you. So you just have to accept the unknowable unknowns. And that I think is part of the point of understanding things within the frame of creation that pre-existed you. And because you weren't there, much of history, you weren't there, right? And so the context is not completely knowable to you, no matter how much the context you think you can have. So that I just wanted to make that clear, because I think that idea of secret is really important when you understand it, in the context of those two statements, which are more secular statements.
Yeah, so I want to expand on that a little bit, because I've been trying to figure out the relationship between secret and veiled, and I've also been wrestling with the idea of a promise, right? So if we look at a marriage, the bride wears a veil in front of her face, right? But she's promised to you, right? And so in the marriage, the promise gets fulfilled, and you get to see beyond the veil, right? You get to partake in something that wasn't yours and didn't belong to you, and and in in the union, right? In the belonging, something gets revealed, right? And it's like, well, yeah, that only gets revealed to you. Like nobody else gets to participate in that ever, because they can't, because it's not their wife, and it's like even if you do the crazy divorce thing or whatever, like they're not you, and they're not in that relationship. So like it's just gonna be unique to you, right? And it would be inappropriate to share your wife. The unveiling of your wife, that's not the thing that you share. Like that's the thing that you cherish, right? You might share the fruits of the unveiling of your wife, right? Like maybe you become a better person and you shine upon the world as a bright light, an example for everybody. Like that's the thing that you get to share, but that's a change in you or an affordance that appeared to you as a consequence of getting married. And it's not the thing in and of itself. It's the fruit of it. Um, and so I feel like well, I've been complaining about people, right, saying that they're safe, right? Like, ooh, like these personality types, right? Like now I understand everybody, and like everybody has to use personality types to relate to other people, and and you just end up. Or I went to the gym and I got myself back together, and like everybody needs to go to the gym because like that's. Or I started doing meditation or whatever, right? As they're all partial paths, right, that have partial revelation, and they're unique to you as well, right? So the thing that is shared in them or something, or that is shareable, is the hope, right? Like the hope of or the promise of being able to heal. That's the thing that you share. You don't share the means of healing. And so like yeah, some things should remain secret, right? Because like what what if I tell you like this is the way to heal, right? Like now there's a temptation. Like, oh, I want to have that healing, but you can't. And so what happens if you pursue that? You will make yourself sick because the medicine is a poison to you.
And even if you can integrate something yourself, like there is that aspect of them being exiled. Like, oh, I saw something and like no one's gonna believe this. Like say even if you could be shown, like day 3 of creation or something, like I can't even perceive all of the things happening in this very room that I'm in, from all the possible angles or anything. It's just like that's not possible. Like I have to have an extremely limited view. I was thinking, kind of a silly example that it's like if you have, like a pet animal or something like a rabbit or something, like from its perspective, it's just okay, lettuce just kind of like shows up, and it doesn't know where it comes from. And like you could even have a limited revelation of that and like lift the rabbit up and show it the refrigerator where the lettuce is stored. And it's like even if it could actually like understand the concept of refrigerator, like the other rabbits aren't gonna believe it. Like there's and it doesn't stop there. Like okay, like the lettuce doesn't come from the refrigerator. Like there's always another thing. Like you can't go beyond.
Why are you forcing the rabbit out of its hole?
Right? Yeah, you shouldn't.
Stop doing that, Socrates.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's what I'm thinking is that you just wind up creating the thing of like, oh, now the rabbit's going back to the cave to tell the to tell the other rabbits about where the lettuce came from and gets jeered at. So
Okay. We have a book club on the Republic on Texas Wisdom Community YouTube channel. Check it out. Read along. Also join the Discord to ask questions or do it in the comment section. We love to engage with you. Mark has been typing in the chat. I've been reading the chat and letting things happen. um, so yeah, I think we can kind of land the plane here, um, or we can just establish land, because I think that's the purpose of the integration. We're gonna have to establish some land under a principle. So I guess that's also a frame that we can bring in, like how are we adhering to the principle or the law that's following from it in the establishment of the land, so that we can find life. in life. So we will do a minute contemplation or reflection, and then we'll talk about our stuffs. And you can ask questions in the chat because we invite participation. So I'll take it off first. I was thinking about the establishment of space and that you need to have a shared space and the functionality of a mountain in the shared space because the mountain has its own reality and it doesn't matter the way that you see the mountain because it still acts on you, right? And so like that's that's how you get to share things. Um, Assuming that you accept the existence of the mountain, right? Because we're at the point that 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 is being denied. Um, but yeah, like the importance of going through these motions, because like I was thinking about communion, or the enablement of communion or connection, and like you have to go through the mountain, like you have to have the external point of reference, because else you're just pointing at air. Nobody else an insight they want to share? Castle's still flooded. He can't share.
I think I gave everything I had, and I'm still flooded.
Well, do you feel blown up yet? Because like that needs to happen.
I am floating at the surface like so many. I got my water wings on. So,
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Like balloons, they float on water, and like
Yeah.
they're like boats. Boats are like balloons.
Yeah. Some of that like throne symbolism again, probably with that, like the thing about like using the vessels thing. I mean, boats are a type of vessel. Also with Saint Paul referring to people as vessels of various different types of materials, and then the now I'm not going to be able to get rid of like the inflatable atom image out of my head.
Okay. Well, is everybody complete?
I'm satisfied.
Then I will follow Mr. Clark's example and wish everybody a wonderful day. Please leave comments in the comment section. Participate in whatever way you can. Participation will inflate you and make a space for growth. There we go. See ya.